already have recorded.
No, I didn't.
Okay, so starting up in Romans again, I'm passing out. Oh, Nate, do you have that big giant chart with all the kings' histories, the kings' lineages? Did I give you a copy of that? Okay.
It's sitting on the wall.
All right. What I'm going to be talking about, if it's up on your wall and you can see it, down from the House of David, between the ancient British and House of David, we're going to be talking about Caradoc and Gladys. Just to kind of fill you in on that. All right, so this is going to be a little bit of background, again, with the Romans letter. You know, there's so much history involved in this that I really want to make sure that you guys are, you know, kind of putting on the shoes of Paul back in this time to kind of see all this stuff that's going on. You know, because the earlier church knew a lot of these stories, you know, but over time in the centuries now they're puzzles for us to put back together. Okay? And it's interesting that the more you put these puzzle pieces together, the more you see, you know, why these events happened and how they actually could happen. Okay? Like, for instance, did anyone ever wonder why it is that Paul had the ability to appeal to Caesar? Okay? Now, granted, he was a citizen. Okay? But us as citizens of the United States, we can appeal to the Supreme Court. But I'm sure Alex can fill you in on how difficult that really is, that only about 1% of cases ever see the Supreme Court. Close? Of all the cases that get filed for Supreme Court?
Probably something smaller than that. But
He say even less than 1%.
they only see like five or six cases a year.
5 or 6 cases a year. So now, just think back to now Paul's time. How is he able to appeal to Caesar? All right? Now, the answer is in the scriptures, but it's interesting that I went through all my commentaries. There's a pile of books over here that you guys can walk past and see. All these different commentaries, they all wave past this one little verse, and we find out that Paul had a very special relative. Okay? Let me see if I got something pulled up on my computer about it from earlier.
Oh, that's weird.
I'm looking for the note on it.
That's really weird.
Yeah, actually, this little chart that I gave you, that even though it's a part of the large one that's on the back of this wall, there is so much information contained on it, like you will be busy forever. Oh, you know what I just thought of? I did have a tab pulled up from earlier. Remember last week we had that verse when we were talking about how Paul says that I am a slave, and we were going through different verses to kind of get the mindset of, you know, how slaves were viewed. And we came across this one that in the version that I had, it said that if you basically kind of pamper your slave while they're a child, that when they get old, you'll have a son. Okay? And then all of a sudden, I forget who read it, but when they read it, it said that, or I think it was Mia, she said that, you know, in the end, you would have, you know, a person that rebels against you, a rebellious one. All right, so when I went back to the original Hebrew on that, all right, I really didn't think that anything could get messed up in translation with that. Unfortunately, those two words that were used for slave in that case and for son in that case were only used one time in the entire scriptures. So there was no comparison. So in context, some people over the time chose heir or a son. Some people chose a rebellious one. Okay? So that was kind of the explanation from last week of like why we had two, you know, different spectrums on, you know, that one verse. I was pretty sure that couldn't get messed up. Okay. All right, can somebody look up Romans 16:13 for me? Now this one, because like I said, we may get a couple different answers because of the fact of how translators have, you know, basically looked at this.
Romans what?
Romans 16, verse 13. Remember I told you guys from the very beginning that whenever there's a name mentioned in Scripture, that you should probably take the time to figure out who that person was. This is one of those cases that without properly looking into who he is talking about, we would never know this little piece of information that you guys are about to learn tonight. Have you ever heard any of this?
I've got it. No, I haven't.
Okay,
16:13.
Yeah, Romans 16:13. Who's got it?
I got
I
it.
do.
I don't think everybody will be able to hear you, Nate.
Okay.
But go ahead and read along. You can hear what they say. Go ahead, if you can hear them. Can somebody read it for me loud?
Sure. Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother, who has been a mother to me too.
Okay. Anybody have a different version of that? Because that's one of those things where it kind of implies that, you know, like I have a friend, Matt, Mark, and Mickey, that their mom was like a mom to me, but not a mom. Anybody have the other version of that?
I got salute Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother and mine.
His mother and mine also. Okay? So that's very interesting. Now, who is this Rufus character? Okay? That's why I gave you guys this chart of genealogy, all right, so we can start putting these pieces together.
Over
All right.
there on the table.
If you guys see on this little list here, below King Lear and just below Caradoc, we have Claudia, all right? Claudia married Rufus. So what we have, does anybody know who Caradoc is? Or actually in his Latin form, Caractacus? Anybody? All right, so Caractacus, Caradoc was his name from the Welsh or from the British line. Caradoctus, Caractacus was his Latin name when he became basically kind of a Roman citizen. He was actually a British king that was trying to stomp out Rome. And he was actually so feared that he ended up, his name was used by Roman mothers, and they would basically kind of taunt their children if they weren't listening to them. They would say, if you don't pay attention to me and do what I say, Caractacus will come and get you. Okay, because he was pretty well feared. He was a really great general, and the only way that he actually got taken down, and this is even stuff you can just find basically on Wikipedia if you don't want to really do some digging, but then you find out that he was actually taken down by a treachery amongst his own people, and then he was paraded through the streets of Rome, and he was set to be killed. Okay, now what ends up happening is that he pleads, and he, I believe it's Tacitus, Tacitus records basically his speech before the Senate, and it was so moving that he was allowed a stay of execution, and he was actually just put on kind of a house arrest for a 7-year period. Okay, now he has a daughter named Gladys. All right, and I'll talk about her in a second. But this Linus and Claudia that is in this line coming from Caradoc, all right, Linus is the first registered pope in the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, so obviously he was a big character. All right, now I say first because of the fact that in all likelihood, you know, Peter probably did not make it to Rome. There was another Peter, but not Saint Peter. In fact, in one of my histories of Rome, one of the notes that they actually make is the fact that in the founding of the Roman Church, it says Ambrosiaster, writing in the 300s, says that the church in Rome was not founded by an apostle, but was started by a Hebrew. That believer name was never recorded, and the first members of the church in Rome were probably Jewish, but did not last long, okay, as far as being Jewish. And that we already know. Paul talks about some of the Jewish people that came from Rome. So, all of this to point out that Paul, actually it's explained here pretty well. This comes from actually Ancestry.com, so you guys can do this on your own research here. You can do a search for that. Rufus Pudens and St. Paul are showed to be half-brothers with the same mother but by different fathers. His mother and mine thus appears to have been the mother of an elder son, Paul, by a Hebrew husband. Okay? Because remember, Paul was a Roman by what that made him special? Remember when he was taken into custody? And he said, I am a Roman citizen by
birth. wasn't
by
it?
birth. Okay? Alright, so, his mother, or no, there we go. Paul and the Hebrew husband, that's where he gets his, Hebrew heritage. That's where he was getting his training to be a Pharisee. And the younger son, Rufus, by a second marriage with a Roman Christian. Okay? Now, at the time, they probably weren't a Christian. Okay? But sometime after the message ended up in Rome, that's where we find that, the family was converted. This is the first founding church that we're talking about in Rome. Okay? Now, it's interesting, Gladys. Remember I talked about her briefly earlier. Gladys is a very important lady because of the fact that she is a daughter of Caradoc, okay, which was this British king line. She was the daughter of Caradoc, and if you look down in her ancestry about 3 generations, who do you see?
Constantine.
Constantine, okay. Now it's interesting, you've probably all heard that, he looked up at the sun, he's seen a cross, and, a voice spoke to him that in this sign you will conquer. That sign actually was not very foreign to him, because it was actually carried by his family line in previous generations, okay. So he resurrected this cross from his history, reused it in his conquering efforts across Europe. Let's see if I'm missing any notes here. Linus, the first pope in Rome. Gladys. Oh, Gladys. Check this out. She actually is recorded. Joseph of Arimathea. All right. Basically, after the death of Christ, the Marys disappear. Joseph of Arimathea disappears. The only one that we really hear about is the brother of Jesus. Okay. Does anybody know who he was?
James.
Okay. Anybody? Good. Anybody know what he was in Jerusalem, or what he became for 19 years?
He led the Jerusalem church.
Yes, he led the Jerusalem church. However, he did believe in the resurrected Christ. The only thing was that if you came to his church as a Christian, you had to become circumcised and live by the law. Okay, that was the big deal. That was the whole first council, I believe, around Acts chapter 13. They had this big argument where some of James's crowd comes down from Jerusalem. They see Paul and Peter eating with some Gentiles, and they flip out because there's Gentiles in the church. They even go so far, these ones from James, go to peep on one of the people that were traveling with Paul, in the bathroom to find out he wasn't circumcised. So, they went to great extents, to kind of find out if you were in their, I'm going to say, in their church gang, okay? So, that band that left Jerusalem after the crucifixion, we never hear anything about them again. However, we do have one account in Rome of them being there. We have another account that Joseph of Arimathea ends up in Great Britain, and he founds the Church of Glastonbury. Now, that church was the first church above ground after the crucifixion. Okay, the church that they had in Rome, that actually, I believe it was ran by Gladys and Rufus. And what ends up happening is that while they're running this, not really a home church, but it was kind of like a little safe house for Christians passing through, where they could be fed, where they can get food, where they could fellowship. When Emperor Nero came in, he ended up starting executing everybody. That was, the end of this little, hospice, or, whatever you would end up calling what they were running. However, we find out that the Marys and Lazarus, okay, this man rose from the dead, okay, and he came from a small town, but then disappeared. Does anybody know what happens to Lazarus? You? Anything? No? Alright, Lazarus, alright, if you follow the recorded history, in about 49 AD, well, we find out that in Rome, there was this big argument. I forget the historian, but he records that in 49 AD, that the Caesar expelled all Jews from the city of Rome. Okay? Now, we have an account of that in Acts chapter 18. I think it's actually verse 2. Can somebody check that? Acts 18, verse 2? I'm pretty sure that's it. So all the Jews get expelled from Rome, and so what we have is Joseph of Arimathea, the Marys, Lazarus. They cross the Mediterranean. There's actually ship records that have them crossing the Mediterranean and landing in the coast of France. Okay? Now it's very interesting. This is the only place where we find graves for them. This is the only place where, in tradition, we have them. That is 18? Okay. Can somebody read 18 too?
If you still have it, go ahead, because I just closed
All
it.
right. There, Paul met a Jew named Aquila, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome.
All right, so there we go. So the Emperor Claudius expels all of them because of the uproar that was going on. This fighting between, am I a Gentile? Can I be in the church? All this stuff is going on, so he just finally gets sick of it all, kicks all of them out of Rome. It is on that that voyage leaving where we find the records of them leaving Rome, ending up in Spain, and then in southern France we find all these artifacts, all these places, all these burial sites that have to do with the Marys and with Lazarus. Okay. Now Lazarus, it's very interesting, he ends up founding the very first church in Marseille. Okay, he was kind of like the first bishop or pope, whatever they would call him, probably more so along the lines of a bishop. He ends up being the first bishop in the coast of France, in the southern part of France, and that is where Lazarus goes. That is where you can find Lazarus' grave. Interestingly, there was another one. I want to say it was either one of the people that were healed of blindness. Remember that one boy who is blind from birth and then, he's healed? It's either him or the one with the crippled hand that gets healed. You also find them in south of France, but their name has changed. Okay? Again, with the Roman Empire, just like Caradoc, that was his name from his homeland, but when he ends up in Rome, they start calling him Caractacus. Okay? So again, these are some of the things that make some of this research hard because there's multiple names, Some of this information, if you guys are interested, you can find a book called Did Paul Visit Rome? There's a couple of them out there, a couple different printings of it. I'm pretty sure they all have about the same information. But going back to Paul, how was it that he could address Caesar? It was because his half-brother was actually on the Senate. Okay, so he had like a foot right in the door, being able to, talk to the emperor. All right, so the book of Romans, there's a couple quotes that I was trying to find, and because of the fact that, this book of Romans is very important. If you think about it, Paul didn't know if he was ever going to get here, so he was he knows that this church has started, all right, so they had some kind of a route, they had some kind of a start, whether it be just from traveling, because, being on the Mediterranean, it's kind of like, a telephone system. Everything traveled along that Mediterranean Sea. And so somehow believers got to Rome and were starting to preach Jesus, okay? It also could have been through the efforts of Joseph of Arimathea and the band that was traveling with him, some of the believers that first fled. So what we have is that throughout the centuries, we have people that have been awoken to the history and the story of this book of Romans, okay? All right, Augustine was converted by reading a verse from Romans. He was a teacher in Milan who was living safely the life of a heathen. One day he sat in the yard of a friend, crying because of the wickedness of his life, and heard a child singing a song. Take up and read, take up and read. Next to him lay an open scroll of the book of Romans. He did take up and read, and the first thing his eyes focused on were the words, "Let us behave decently, as in the daytime, not in orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and debauchery, not in dissension and jealousy. Rather clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ, and do not think about how to gratify the desires of the sinful nature." Augustine would later write, "No further would I read, nor did I need, for instantly, as the sentence ended, by a light as it were, or a security infused in my heart, all the gloom of doubt vanished away." Another one was Martin Luther, okay? Martin Luther, actually, it was kind of funny. I was trying to find a quote, and this is the book that I borrowed from Miss Black, Marvella. And as I'm looking for the quote, I'm looking for the preface that Martin Luther wrote, and underlined is the quote that I was looking for. Okay, so I found that to be pretty awesome, that even maybe I was on the right track for this study. But Martin Luther said, this is the same quote from the book, just in slightly different English, because again, we're translating from German into English, so you get a little bit of variation. "Romans is worthy not that every Christian should know it word for word by heart, but occupy himself with it every day, as daily bread to the soul. It can never be read or pondered too much, and the more it is dealt with, the more precious it becomes, and the better it tastes. Now, in the kind of literal German translation, what he was saying is that the more you chew it, kind of like, with beef jerky, at first it might be tough, but the more you chew it, the softer it gets. So that's kind of the, what he was getting across. The English translation changes it to the better it tastes. Again, having to do with the mouth, but yet not really, in the aspect that they were using. John Calvin said that when anyone gains knowledge of the New Testament when anyone gains a knowledge of the New Testament and the very purest gospel, okay, talking about the book of Romans. Tyndale wrote, I think it meet that every Christian man not only know it by rote and without the book, but also exercise himself therein evermore continually, as with the daily bread of the soul. No man verily can read it too oft or study it too well, for the more it is studied, the easier it is, the more it is chewed, the pleasanter it is, and the more it is groundly it is searched, the precious things are found in it. Old English translation. So again, obviously there was some connection between him and Martin Luther, because those quotes are so close. But as you can see, this book of Romans, for centuries, it's been a very important book, but somehow it keeps getting swept away, swept under the rug. We have these church fathers that are, founders in our beliefs and our doctrines, but yet for some reason we so neglect the book of Romans, okay? There's a lot of other interesting information about the book of Romans. If you guys are interested, you guys can have those notes, or I can email them to you. Okay, so, it's very important that we know the value of Scripture. I don't know if you guys know, I've mentioned it a few times, but there was one ceremony that was done once a year in the Old Testament times, where actually it may even still be done today, but I doubt if they're as strict as this. But the entire congregation would stand as the entire Torah is read. Okay, now who knows what the Torah is?
First 5 books of the Bible.
First five books of the Bible. Okay, so can you just imagine standing all of that time? Can you imagine in our church today if somebody walked in and said, all right, everybody, I need you to stand. We are going to read the first 5 books of the Bible. There's going to be some hoots and hollers, okay? All right, so...
how long would that take to read? Wouldn't that take all day?
It would take quite a while. I can actually figure it out because I have the audio files.
Don't they do it with bar mitzvahs?
The entire Torah?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm not sure. I'll have to look into that.
I thought they did. I have an impression that you...
If you want, you can Google it and see. I mean, it's still maybe something that they do to this day, but, I mean, even though now we have seats in churches, at that time they didn't. You'd sit on the floor and you'd stand. That was all you had as far as options. All right, so getting into the book of Romans, we're going to do a slight little recap and then move on because we're going to get into some heavier stuff this week than we did last week. I don't think we're going to get past 24, 25. And I told you from the very beginning that I wanted to make sure we go through this. And at first, we're going to be very detailed. As we go on and you guys learn these words, I'm expecting that you guys are going to be looking at this Greek and starting to pick up on some of this stuff. Oh, which reminds me. All right, for you guys who have been coming this last year, there's one more thing. Martin Luther, all right, one more thing that he says. Therefore, I too will do my best as far as God has given me power to open up the way into it through this preface so that it may be better understood by everyone. He's talking about the book of Romans. Okay, book of Romans. For heretofore, it has been evilly darkened with commentaries of all kinds of idle talk. So Martin Luther in the 1500s is saying at his point, the commentaries that he was reading, that the book of Romans has been altered and evilly translated. Okay? It has been darkened with commentaries of all kinds of idle talk, though it is in itself a bright light, almost enough to illuminate all the Scripture. Okay? And Paul makes a lot of references. We're going to pull up a few of them. Hopefully you guys can pick up on them, or even other ones. To begin with it, we must have knowledge of its language. Okay, now remember, we said that language was a vehicle. All right, if we don't know what the original author understood a word to mean, all right, and we try to read it in today's English, we're going to get very screwed up. We're going to end up in a different place because it's a different vehicle. The word let I often use because of the fact it's an easy one. Back in the day, let meant to withstrain. Today it is to allow. You know, okay, Mom, can I go to the store? I will let you go. Okay? In the past, that meant to withstrain, though. So to begin, we must have a knowledge of language and know what St. Paul meant by the words law, sin, grace, faith, righteousness, flesh, spirit. Now it's interesting, all those words over this last year, those are all study words that we have gone through the scriptures front to back to find out what God meant when he used those words. Okay? And I found it very ironic that those words that we had been studying just happened to be the ones that Martin Luther mentions. To fully understand the book of Romans, you have to understand those words. All right, so now, anybody have their notes from those word studies? You should probably go back through just to make sure. Sin. Who can tell me what it is in the Greek?
Missing the mark?
Missing the mark. The word is?
Armatia.
Harmatia. Any word for faith. Or the word believe that gets translated. When we come across this?
Pistis.
Pistis. Yes, or pisteo. All right, it has to do with a saving act. Let's see, what was one of the other ones he had mentioned? You guys remember scripture? Anybody remember the Greek? Graphy? Graphy, that was one that we went through. Righteousness. That rightness with God. Sin, grace, faith. All right, so you guys are on the right track, though. You know, we have a good basis to start. We've been going over it as we go through these lists. So from the very beginning, we start out Paul talking about how he is not just a servant, but he is a slave. And remember that that word slave comes from a couple roots. One of the roots meant to tie, to bind, to fetter, okay? To ensnare, to capture, and to belong to another. So he says flatly, I belong to who? Christ. Okay? So, if we are trying to follow in the footsteps of Christ, if we are trying to follow in the footsteps of Paul, you know, we also have to become this bond slave to Christ. Okay? And that means that it's not what we want, it's what Christ wants. Okay? Think of the one woman who was healed. She was laying in bed, she was sick. Okay? Now, we don't know what she was doing before Jesus showed up. She's laying in bed, she's sick at that point. He heals her, and what does she do? Does she get up and goes back to doing her laundry or goes back to doing housework?
No, she gets up and serves him.
She gets up and immediately serves Jesus. Okay? So, when you have the opportunity of this salvation act from God, where this glimmer of hope is in your heart that, you know, maybe I will make it, should we go back to doing things how we've always done them in our lives? Or do we look at the scriptures and say, all right, God, what is it that you want me to be doing? Okay, because yeah, I got laundry, I've got housework, but what are your needs for me for today? Okay, because for him to connect to this world, he has us. Okay, we are his hands, we are his arms. All right, we are the ones that feed the needy, who feed the poor. We're the ones to go and help out the widowed and the fatherless, okay? James talks about that being what true religion really is. Okay, not what we've kind of built religion into. True religion is those arms of God acted out through us to show the world what? To show the world love. Okay? Alright, so moving on, he says that he has been separated. Alright, he has been called an apostle, so he's setting up right from the get-go that he is who he said he is. He was appointed by God, and he, as it says here, separated unto the gospel of God. Okay, that word separated comes from, if you can see it there, this apo. All right, apo means to separate from a union. All right, to sever, to separate, and then horizo is the end of that word, and horizo is where we get the word horizon. All right, so as you have the earth and the sky, they're two distinct things. You know, they don't blend into each other. He separated himself so you could see where Paul was a servant of the gospel. Okay? All right, going on. Dunamai, remember that's when it says the power, that's a power that talks about a power from God. Dunamai is the word we get dynamite from, God's power. It's also the same word that gets used when they translate miracles. All right, the dunamai, power of God. Let's see. By whom we have received grace and apostleship. Why? For obedience to the faith among all nations for his name's sake. Okay? Anybody remember what obedience comes from? It comes from the root word ob, audio systems. Look at the Greek word there. Let's see, obedience. Akio. Okay? Hypo means beneath, under. Alright? And akuo is the hearing. Remember that? And that's where we get our word audio systems from, we talked about last week. So, under the hearing of. Alright? That's what obedience really means. So, if you are being obedient to God, then you are coming under his hearing and doing what he says, right? You're not hearing what God says and doing the exact opposite. That's not obedience, okay? Obedience has to do with hearing and obeying, okay? There's another one. See that? To the faith among all nations. Ethnician. Does that word sound familiar to anybody? Ethnician? Ethnicity, okay? That is where we get the word for ethnic groups, okay, for ethnicity. So if you really think about it, he's saying that it is faith to all nations, not only nations, but every ethnicity that we have. Okay, it wasn't excluding anyone. Anyone could come based on their faith, all right, and share and partake in this gospel, this good news. Remember John 10:27, that my sheep hear my voice, and I know them and they follow me. Okay, going back to that word obedience. Okay, in that verse 7, talking about saints, remember that, sainting something from the old tradition is just anything that is given wholly over to the deity, okay? So the, the Oracle of Delphi, she was sainted to Delphi, all right? She was that oracle. She was the one that gave her body and her life over to whatever that god was, okay? So again, now in Christianity, now we've adopted that. So if our lives are in service to God, okay, that means that you are sainting your life to God. All right, you're giving it over fully for God to use in whatever way that he needs. All right, he's talking here in verse 8 about how the faith of the Romans is, basically known throughout all the known world. And it's interesting that John Chrysostom says that two traits of the Romans was that they believed, and when they did it boldly. Like there was no holding back when they believed something. All right, down to verse 11. Okay, remember that charisma. Anybody remember what it means?
It was the gracious.
Grace?
Yeah.
Remember, there was something connecting with God, what that charisma was, and it kind of really connected the idea of the charismatic movement. Remember, it was a gift that was given by God. Okay? So it was a gift received by no merit of the person who is receiving. Okay. Nations, not Jews. Learned and skilled. Okay, I guess we'll skip down to verse 16 for the next page. Alright, all this stuff is pretty much straightforward. There wasn't anything too big. You guys do remember that little A sign. In verse 14, okay, it's the second letter from the actual verses. You see that little A sign there? Remember that reverses something, okay? These are things that I want you guys to start picking up on, because as we're reading through this, you'll be able to start to see the root word in the Greek, and you'll see the A. That means it's reversed or, flipped in a different direction.
I'm sorry, what are you referring to there?
All right, if you find verse 14, I am a debtor both to the Greeks and to the barbarians.
Okay.
All right, the word that they're translating for foolish, two words from that actual verse in the English. You see that enoitos,
Mm-hmm.
that at the very beginning of
Okay.
it, all right, that means to not or reverse something, all right?
Okay.
And so in a couple of the verses that we're going to go over tonight, we're going to have that A. And so I want you guys to remember that. I'm going to point that A out
Okay.
again to you, and you'll see that it reverses. All right, so let's just say, like pistis, all right? This is one that we'll come across. Pistis means to be faithing, right? Apistis means to
Not faith.
not faith. Exactly, you guys got it. All right, so verse 16. This is the whole crux of this whole gospel and the book of Romans. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, the good news of Christ, for it is the power of God unto salvation, to everyone that believeth. All right, and what's that word for believeth? Pistoanti. So pistis, faith, faithing. So, to everyone that is faithing, all right, that faithing act of trusting God, to the Jew first, and then also to the Greek. Okay? And that word, the word that they're using there, just kind of denotes it's Helena, which is just a non-Jew. Okay, so first to the Jew, all right, the message was brought to them by Jesus himself. They rejected it, and then it goes to the non-Jew. Okay? For therein is the righteousness of God revealed from faith to faith, as it is written, the just shall live by faith. Now, why is that verse special? The just shall live by faith. Why is that an important one that we should probably all know about? I'll give you a hint. It has to do with Mr. Martin Luther.
That's the one that you were saying where he was, I guess, meditating on that as part of his penance thing.
Yes.
On the stairs.
Yes, he was going up. They had taken the stairs that supposedly Christ had gone up, and they had moved them to Rome. He traveled to Rome. He was going up these stairs on his knees, and as he was doing it, again, remember he had said earlier that they should have this book, all of us should memorize the book of Romans. He is saying that verse, and it hits him, it clicks. The just shall live by faith. Okay? Remember that thing when we studied the word repentance, all right? Repentance just meant a change of the mind. But yet we get it from, the Latin, which meant repeated pain. All right? So you can see all the things that, as a Catholic growing up, all these things that had to do with repeated pain, that's where we get that idea of repentance from. However, in the original, in the Greek, it was a change of the mind, where you turn from something. So basically, our sinful lives, the things of selfishness that we are doing for me, when I want to do it, how I want to do it, we turn from that and then turn to God. That was the whole idea of repentance, all right? So that verse right there is what started the Reformation. And that's why I say it's kind of an important, verse, because without that, the 95 Theses never would have gotten nailed to that door. He would have never had that change of heart where he realized suddenly that it wasn't by works, that it was by faith alone. It's a gift that you can do nothing for. Righteousness, let's see. So, the righteousness of God is revealed. Now, that word reveal, apocalyptai, we're going to come across that a few more times. Remember, that is to bring from behind a curtain. Okay? So basically, if there was a curtain here and there was someone standing there and I moved the curtain and I revealed that person, I was doing that apocalyptai, okay? Revealing what was, hidden or uncovered, and bringing it to light. Okay, verse 18. For the wrath. Now that word wrath means settled anger. Settled. Now that's very important because it's different from just the idea of wrath. Wrath I can think of, my dad getting all pissed off when he got home from work, running through the house and looking for me under the bed because I was, fighting with my sister or something, That is what I think of when I think of the word wrath, okay? However, this was a settled anger. So whatever this anger was, it was already dealt with. So now remember, we're talking about God who lives in a place where there is no time, all right? So the wrath of God, the settled issue of his anger, is revealed from heaven. All right. Now this is a very, very interesting verse. This is one that I had questioned back in high school, and it's amazing that it took 12 years to really understand what this was talking about. Now this is also very controversial. What I'm going to be telling you guys about tonight, very controversial. Again, it's like that thing where we found earlier that you can check 100 commentaries. And they all kind of skip around the meanings of these couple next verses. Okay, so for the wrath of God is revealed, that apocalyptai, it is revealing what is hidden. Okay, the wrath is that settled anger. It's the word orgi in the Greek, and it's a disposition which steadfastly opposes. So God is steadfastly opposing something, and it is this settled. It's done. Okay, against all ungodliness. Okay, from heaven. All right, that word for heavens. All right, what do you guys think it means? Heaven. Do you think it's that place with the clouds and the harps and God and all the angels, or
stars?
Okay, the stars. All right, the Greek word that they're translating right there, you can see it there in the Greek. You guys can check it out yourself. In the Strong's number, you can see it. It's the 3772. It is the vaulted expanse of the sky with all things visible in it. All right, so now just think about that. The wrath of God is revealed from the vaulted heavens, everything in it. Stars, planets, sun, the moon. Somehow those things are revealing something to us. Okay? You guys catch on to that so far? Not losing anybody? Mm-hmm. Okay. Against all ungodliness. All right, that word ungodliness is a Sabian. All right, you can see there the Greek translated irreverence. The two words that it comes from, remember that so we know that whatever the word is, it's the reverse of, right? So the Sabian part is sebomai, which means to respect. So what do you think asabian means?
To disrespect.
Disrespect. Okay. That's the word that they are translating here. Against all ungodliness, unreverence, and unjustice. Now remember that we talked about that unjustness word. Do you guys see the original Greek? Dikein. Okay, remember Dike was that goddess of vengeance from Zeus. All right, so the idea of righteousness is what is right to God. If Zeus told Dike, hey, this person is doing wrong, go take him out. Dike was the one who did the work for Zeus. So that's where that word comes from. So it's a violation of God's standards. Okay, Paul here is using it as God, the God. The Greeks before this point, they would have seen that word and just thought of Zeus sending out Dike to take care of whatever dirty work he needed done. Okay, of humans, of men, the word is actually of mankind. All right, so it's the ungodliness and unrighteousness of mankind. Okay, who hold the truth in, again, adike, injustice. Okay, unrighteousness. All right, so in violation of God's standards. So, for the wrath of God, the settled anger of God is revealed, is brought from behind a curtain, has light shed on it from the heavens against all ungodliness. Okay, does anybody have any idea what they could be talking about yet? Not so much. All right, so let's go on to the next verse and see if maybe we get a little more detail from Paul. All right, because that which is known, all right, not may be known. The original Greek, basically puts that emphasis on because that which is known of God is manifest in them. All right, in them, who's the them?
Heavens.
What was that?
Fallen angels.
The heavens. The heavens. Not the fallen. Not that far. No. Okay, so if you guys can make a little note, if you guys are doing notes here, in them, draw a line up and circle heavens. All right, so we know what we're talking about. Because see, this is the thing. The translators, I don't know if they were just translating word for word and not trying to connect it back and find out what we were talking about. But it is because that which is known of God is manifest, okay, in them, which is the heavens, okay. That word known actually is a word that's used for acquaintance. So it's a very close, intimate knowledge, all right? But so far I don't think anybody here knows that close, intimate knowledge that manifests this message of God in the heavens, okay?
So,
I guess I'm looking. I just happen to be looking at the NIV right now,
Okay.
and the NIV particularly seems to give a stronger impression that the them isn't the heavens, but it's these people.
Yeah. I'm looking at it and I can see it. It does kind of present it as if it's talking to individuals.
Okay, so this is from the NIV. This is in. I'll read 18 and 19. For the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and wickedness of men, who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. All right. So we have the Greek here, so we can double check. So verse 8.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that you're wrong. It's just kind of a very different
Right.
than what.
And see, that's the thing. Like, see, nobody really knows what these verses are talking about. Okay. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was going to a Bible study group with
Dominic?
what was that lady? Yeah, Dominique. Okay, Dominique was running. You guys know Dominique Newman.
Yeah.
And we came across this verse, and the guy tried to explain it. You know, he was on this little video series. He tried to explain it, and I was just like, all right, if you guys really want to know what this means, next week or whenever we're done with the series, I'll go through this, and I'll show you, you know, what's going on here, all right? Because there's been a lot of errors because people aren't really knowing where to connect things and what we're talking about, all right? Because this message or this knowledge that is in the heavens, all right, it's been completely forgotten about, okay? So, because that which is known of God is manifest in them, okay? And again, the emphasis is going back into the heavens, all right? For God has showed it unto them. That going back to those who are doing unrighteousness, all right? So we have two thems, two different places where this gets connected back to, all right? Now it's interesting that the word that it's, let's see, known of God is manifest. The word that they're translating manifest, in the Greek, you see that the word is apparent, all right? If you guys see the Greek word, phaneron, you guys see that?
Mm-hmm.
All right, does that look like anything? If you guys have taken anything with, like, you know, the breakdown of atoms and whatnot, you know,
This word?
particles, huh?
I see. I don't have the paper.
Oh, that word right there. Does that look like any word to you? Something having to do with light? How do you guys know how light works? That you don't actually see objects, you see things reflecting off the objects?
So like everything's bland, but this gives off this isn't actually blue, but the color blue is reflected off of it.
And what's hitting your eye that's letting you see that?
I can't remember the word.
Photons. Okay? Alright, so this little word right here in the Greek, this actually means shining. Now isn't that interesting that we're talking about the heavens, alright, so it's not just made manifest, alright, whatever this message is, okay, whatever this is that is made manifest, it's actually shining, okay? So there's another clue that, you know, we translate this word kind of off. You know, we're looking for a word that has to do with light, alright, and, you know, something having to do with, like, the idea of photons. So light is being emitted, so they're shining. This message is shining. God has showed it unto them, okay? All right, for the invisible things, now the translators always get this one kind of goofy. If, you know, bacteria isn't really invisible, right? But we can't see it. Like, there's bacteria on my hand, I'm sure, okay? Even though I wash my hands 20 times a day, there's still bacteria somewhere on my hand. Now, I don't see it, but does it mean it's invisible?
No, you just can't see it with your eyes.
Okay, that's the same thing what's going on here. All right, the translator's seen this word for something that you cannot see, and they said, oh, something that's invisible, not really there. Okay, but it is something there. It's not that it's invisible, okay? It's just not seen or unseen, okay? For the invisible things, the not seen things of Him, from the creation of the world, okay, are clearly seen, being understood by the things. Anybody have any clue what the things are?
For the invisible things of for
Somebody look up Ephesians 2:10 for me, because this word that is being translated here is used 2 times in the whole of Scripture.
Okay, Ephesians what?
Ephesians 2:10.
Oh wait, maybe.
Like, this is some really deep stuff, like, honestly.
Ephesians 2:10.
Yep.
For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do.
All right, read just the first few words.
For we are God's
Workmanship.
workmanship.
All right, this word right here, this poismasin, is workmanship. All right, so these things that are not seen, things that are of God's in the creation of the world, are clearly seen, being understood by all those who are His workmanship. Who here would consider them God's workmanship? Okay, so can anyone please explain to me what these invisible things from the creation, da-da-da-da-da, anybody? Something was lost. Something that Paul knew, okay, has been lost through the centuries.
Story in the stars.
You know where I'm going, yes. You've been here long enough. All right, so this Ephesians 10. The other interesting thing about this word, poismasin, that comes from the word poema, okay? Does that sound like, now Troy, if you were paying attention when we were hanging out last week, you had a first-hand look at this, what I'm talking about right here. All right, poema. Anybody have any idea what that sounds like?
A poem.
Poem. Literally, in that Ephesians verse, all right, reread it with the word poem.
What was the...
I'll do. For we not are His workmanship, but we are His poem. Now, if anybody ever took literature in school, which I'm sure all of us had to get out of high school or through high school, you guys remember studying poems. Every word, every verse, every stanza had a specific place. It was there to help to get the message across of what this poem was about. Okay? So God is not just saying that you are His workmanship. You're not just something carved out of a piece of wood or carved out of molecules. You are a poem being written by God that started in the womb. Okay? Now, is that not more intimately connected to a creator than just saying, oh, we're His workmanship? I can go out to the garage and build 1,000 things. But a poem, that's more spiritual. That connects to the heart. Remember, we were made in the image and the likeness of this God. And all of us being created, we're His poems. So, poems tell a story. Poems express feelings, emotions. You know, poems get a message across. Just for you to consider, you know, what is the poem of your life going to represent? Is it going to reflect back to the Creator? Or is it going to reflect to a person who is so self-indulged in selfish motives, who said, I, me first, when I want and how I want it? Or is your life going to be a poem that reflects love from a God who out of nothing created everything and created you, and then hand-picked you out of all the eons of people that have been across the times of this world, hand-picked you, gave you this gift of salvation? Will you then reflect back the love that was shown to you, or that selfishness? I always teach my children to pray all the time. Lord, help us to be selfless instead of being selfish. Every day, to be a little more selfless, or a little more selfish, and a little more selfless. Okay? So, I mean, you can just see in just this one word how much we could talk about God, the Creator, our view, His view, what He wants from us. Okay? And just the idea that we are created as a poem. Okay? So going back to what this study is about, though, for the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the poems that are made, His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Now this verse caused me a lot of trouble when I was in high school. Because I asked the question, how in the world are the heavens, the stars, the planets, the moon, and the stars, how are they telling me something that I have no excuse for? Okay? Now look at that word for without excuse. You guys notice anything about it? Do you guys see the A that reverses something? Okay? And then apology, apologetics, to argue something. Remember that from anything? Apologetics, the arguing of your belief. Okay? So that A reverses it. So we have absolutely no argument. So you guys get that? So far, does anybody have any clue, any idea what these invisible things that we should know about, okay, because we are his workmanship, we are his poems, they are clearly seen, and we are without excuse. All right, this is pretty. Go ahead.
Stars?
Yes, story of the stars. Anybody know about that? No.
We talk about it often.
I've talked about it, yes, for sure. And this is why. I have been called a lot of evil things because of the fact that I try to show this lost, forgotten story of the stars. Okay? On my journey of just trying to figure out if the story in the stars was anything real, I studied it for 5 years before I told another living soul about it. Okay? And at that time, I was still married. I didn't even tell my wife about the story in the stars because I did not want to lead anyone astray if this was not right, if this was not true. But after those 5 years, that honestly, there is nothing that I can find in it that does not point back to God. Okay? We're going to get into this a little bit tonight. So you guys get so far that there's something big going on here in just this verse. There's something that we're supposed to know about, right?
I have a question.
Yes.
Maybe you were going to talk more about this later, but how many people of that time would have known that stuff?
Well, it's actually really interesting because if you look at all the corruption, all right, Greek mythology transferred into the Roman mythology, the more you know about the story in the stars, okay, this gospel that was written from the beginning of time, from the time when God, set the stars, out there. All right, we have in the book of Job where it says that God himself put the crooked snake in the sky, that he garnished the heavens, all right, with these stories, all right, and that word garnish is like perfect. When you go and garnish something, you make it perfect and you make it beautiful. All right, so this is all what God has done from the scriptures. All right, can somebody look up Psalm 19 for me? I'm going to be looking for, I think, the first 7 verses. Let's start with that. Okay.
Can I see a Bible? My phone is kind of
Right in front of you.
Oh,
It's a New American, but if you want a different version, the first pile is NIV.
so Psalm
19.
Psalm 19, and I want to say it's like 1 through 4, but then you can also continue into verse 7. Because see, this knowledge was definitely known throughout the ages, all right? You find people alluding to it, but I think that at some points in time it was so heretical that it would cost him his life.
Psalm 19.
chapter 19, verse
1. Starting
Okay.
at 1.
When I was traveling up in Canada, I was in Quebec, and there is the oldest church that was the very first church that was built here in America, okay? This huge basilica. As soon as you walk through the back doors of the church, there's like this foyer area. There's a name for it. I kind of forget what it's called. It's like a long hallway that connects to the back of the church. Looking up at the ceiling were the 12 signs of the zodiac. Okay, in the first church that was ever planted here in North America. The entire 12 signs of the zodiac. In mosaic. Okay, you guys know what mosaic is?
Little tiles.
Little teeny tiny pieces of glass or tile. Alright, it took somebody a very long time to put up 12 signs. The hallway was about 15 by, I would guess, somewhere in the neighborhood of 130 feet, 140 feet. Very huge hallway, lots of little tiles to be putting half-inch squares up on a ceiling. That took a long time. Somebody paid a lot of money to have that done. And again, I do mention it is in a basilica. here in North America. All right, you guys could actually take a trip once a year in the summertime. There's a Greek Orthodox church that I talk about where Father David is. That's where we go and learn. We have Greek Bible study.
I'm trying to grab.
There's one right in front of you there. Do you, or do
Can
you want
somebody
to
grab a Bible?
My bad.
All right, so in Hammond at St. Demetrius, you guys can go there. They have a tour once a year. And in one of their stained glass windows, all right, they have the very strange creature of a centaur, okay? And I'll tell you the story of the centaur just because of the fact that you guys probably know the corruption from Greek mythology. Anybody know who the chief centaur was? Chiron? Chiron the Great? No? I thought you guys didn't have to take it for high school?
No.
Greek mythology? Really? Wow.
I did, but it was a long time.
That's interesting. All right, so in Greek mythology, Chiron was the chief of all the centaurs, all right? Dual nature, human and horse, all right? There's an Old Testament verse that talks about how man is like a wild ass that deserves to have his neck broke. So you can kind of pick that, you know, Christ, this dual nature, God and man, all right, is being portrayed by this centaur. This centaur, the mythology of this centaur is that he was immortal, all right? Chiron was immortal, could not be killed. However, took a poisoned dart, all right, an arrow that was meant for someone else, gave his life so that another could live. Does that sound like anyone? Okay. The other things connected with him was that he would prophesy. He was a healer, all right? So he could heal people. He could prophesy. He was a great teacher. People followed him, all right? These are all the things that are talked about this Chiron in the mythology of it, okay? So, 19?
Psalm 19.
Troy, you got it. Go on, Troy.
You gonna read?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The heavens declare that the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. Day to day pours out speech, and night to night reveals knowledge. There is no speech, nor are the words whose voice is not heard. The voice goes out through all the earth, and their words to end of the world. And them has set the tent for the sun, which comes out like a bright room, leaving his chamber. And like a strong man runs its course with joy, is raising it from the end of the heavens to its circuit to the end of them, and there is nothing hidden from its heat.
You can probably stop there.
Yeah, that's good. All right, so the heavens declare the glory of God. Undeniably, what is the glory of God? What is the outray of God?
Jesus coming to the earth to
Christ
save
Jesus.
us.
All right, Christ Jesus. So, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament, all right, now the firmament again, the heavens, all right, showeth his handiwork. Here's that word handiwork again. Now, this is in the Hebrew, so it's probably a different, possibly the same in the Septuagint. Day unto day it utters speech. Has anyone ever heard the heavens declaring speech? Okay. And night unto night showing forth knowledge. So the heavens somehow have knowledge. Okay. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line has gone out through all the earth, and their words are to the end of the world. In them hath he set a tabernacle for the sun. Tabernacle is a dwelling place, you know, a tent, tabernacle, tent. So it's a temporary thing. So I mean, just right there, I mean, we see these very interesting things that are being talked about the heavens that, you know, have been read for centuries, but like, we skim through it. You know, we read through the psalm, go on to the next psalm. And we never stop to think, what in the world is being talked about here? Okay? One day maybe we'll break that down to the original Hebrew. But I mean, even in the King James, I mean, it's kind of pointing to there's something being said through the stars that we've missed. Okay? Now I'm sure if this is your first time hearing this, you think I'm an absolute lunatic. However, like I said, the church has the 12 zodiac signs. Some other little interesting tidbits about it. The ancient zodiac, remember in Egypt we have the Sphinx, okay? The earliest depictions of the Sphinx, actually the earliest drawings, we actually have the Sphinx actually being a woman, okay? Breasts. So that is interesting because it's the key to unlock the zodiac. There is a temple of Deandria that has the entire circle of the stars. Actually, I have a picture of it. I think one of these has a big map of it in the back. Yes. All right, I'm going to pass this around. So basically, all right, for the most part, this map is in the Temple of Deandria, not this picture, but something that depicts all these original 48 star constellations. All right. Now, in it, it separates where the zodiac signs are, all right, where the 12 are. It separates the Virgo, the Virgin, and Leo by the Sphinx, all right, because that's our division point. That's where we start to see where the end and the beginning of this are. All right, so we start with the Virgin. Now, how ironic is that? That we start with the Virgin, who is laying on the ecliptic circle. All right, you can see, if you can find the Virgin on that picture, she is laying on the ecliptic circle. There are things associated with her from antiquity that she is helpless. All right, so she is a helpless virgin, but yet she is also always connected with motherhood. Okay, so it's very ironic that the most ancient cultures connect her with virgin and also with motherhood. All right, in her two hands, you'll see that there's a branch and there's a little a set of seed. All right, I think the word was sepia or something like that, and what it was a desired seed. All right, the very next, now the way it's set up is that you have one constellation, so you have 12 zodiac signs. Each one of those is supported by one of the other 48 signs in the heavens. They're called deacons. Okay, decks, like decks of a ship. Deacons of a church, they support the pastor. The deacons here, or the supporting deacons, they support the first symbol. So the very first sign after the Virgin, we have a woman sitting with a child on her lap. All right, so now she is miraculously with child. And one of the star names that is named for the stars that make up the child is the desire of all nations. Does that sound at all familiar to anybody?
Jesus is called the desire of all nations.
Yeah. All right, now that's just a taste. Like, I'm trying to let you know that I'm not a nut about this, okay? There's been multiple people. That book, I believe, is Bollinger's, all right? That is written at, like, a college level. But he goes through, it's fantastic. He goes through, gives you the original, he gives you the Greek, the corruption, all right? And then he goes back and they dig through the past to find what the original truth was, okay? There's another one, you can actually get online, is, The Glory of the Stars by E. Raymond Cap, Witness of the Stars, and there's another one by,
It's not the one in your hand, is it?
Seiss. No. By Seiss. I forget his first name. That one you can actually download as a free PDF, so you can look through it. Seiss, I would say, is written at a high school level. Bollinger has the most detail. He gets into it to the point where you're like, all right, enough of the detail already. Go to the next sign, okay? But he is very, very thorough in all his information. And then, very recently, anybody know Dr. James Kennedy? Okay. Presbyterian Coral Ridge Church, pretty big televangelist guy. He wrote a book about it too. The reason why I don't often recommend his is that he, at the very end, just gives you a couple other reading sources, but never once, ever, does he mention that, these books were very strong in his influence in writing this. Okay? He makes it kind of sound like he discovered this by himself, and it's interesting that, if you've read these other books, you see a lot of it coming through in this. I'm just going to... What was that? Joseph?
Joseph Seiss.
Oh, Joseph Seiss. Yes, thank you. Yeah, so if you guys put that note down, you can download that one as a PDF, Joseph A. Seiss. I think it's The Gospel in the Stars. Is it The Gospel in the Stars? Okay, The Gospel in the Stars. That's the one that you can find, and you can check this out yourself. It has all the information, it has beautiful pictures, original pictures, because there are things that have been changed. And it's interesting that the ones that dealt with the devil in the end, those were some of the first ones to get distorted, all right? Except for the very last one. That's very interesting. There's the serpent in the sky, all right? You could see it on there, where the altar of sacrifice is being poured out onto it. The birds of the air are coming to devour it, and a cup of wrath is being poured out on this snake that's called the ancient serpent. Okay? Hey, can you show the cover of that book? All right, so the cover of that book has Orpheus wrestling the giant snake while fighting with the scorpion. And what it is that the strong man is wrestling with the ancient serpent, who is trying to attain the crown of righteousness. In the battle, he is stung in the heel, but his foot is raised to crush the heart of the scorpion. Okay? Now, does that scenario sound at all familiar to anybody?
The first curse.
Anybody want to turn to Genesis 3:15? Okay, now I will tell you that if you guys Google just Gospel in the Stars, you are going to find lots and lots of hate mail. Okay? And if you guys haven't studied it yourself, you're going to read this and go, oh, wow, this person is so right. If you understand and you know the story, within minutes, you'll be able to read through this person criticizing it and know that they have not looked more than 10 minutes at the entire Gospel of the Stars. Because it is so saturated with God's truth, it is staggering. Okay? But now if you think about it, we are dealing with supposedly this all-powerful God that created everything, right? So is it really that far-fetched that from the very beginning of time, I mean, throughout the entire Bible, just like with Adam and Eve, remember how it says that Eve was tricked. Adam then had a choice. He could eat of the apple to be with the wife that God gave him, or he could have said, nah, I'm telling God on you. God, look what the woman you gave me has done. But he knew that that was his bride, and he chose death to be with his bride. That was all a type of what Christ was going to do for his church. The very beginning. So is it that impossible that as God hung the heavens, that he didn't write out his story, so that from the very end to the beginning, he could have said, it was right there. You were not a good steward of that information and passed it on. Okay, it was forgotten for centuries. It pops up throughout history now and again. Different authors, you find writing on it. Like I said, a church that was built almost 400 years ago has it in there. A church that was built about 80 years ago has parts of it in there. There's something more to the story other than the zodiac is just something of the devil. Okay, even the word zodiac means the way. And does anybody know what early Christianity was called? The way. Okay, so what the word zodiac actually means is just the way. It's very interesting that the more you look into this and the more you study what these symbols actually mean, it is absolutely amazing that in the sky there's this one picture of a centaur who is piercing the sacrifice, all right? But at the same point, the sacrifice is also the one giving itself. Okay, and again, we have Christ, who was the high priest, who was also the sacrifice. He was also the one who sacrificed and offered himself. Okay, and actually, it's interesting that within the hooves, okay, of the centaur in the sky, you'll never guess what the sign is there. It's the Southern Cross. Okay, wrapped around the centaur.
Where is that on here?
It's going to be it's going to be off of the ecliptic circle, and it's going to be either above or in the middle of it. If you want to pass it back, I should be able to find it for you. Because yeah, it's very staggering when you actually see it. Otherwise, actually, I should be able to find it in this one. Oh, this one's got totally different pictures. This is Cap's book.
I'll stop being stubborn and just hand you the book.
No problem.
Okay, Genesis 15.
Yes, Mary, I'll look, you read. Genesis. Wait,
And I will
3:15?
put...
Genesis 3:15.
3:15, yes. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. And he will crush your head, and you will strike his heel.
My sister brush.
You says what?
Brush, Bruce, whatever.
Bruise.
Bruce.
Brush is said brush, Bruce, whatever.
So you can kind of see that, that from the cover of that book. Also, I have little cards that at the door as you go out that kind of give this story in a nutshell.
Brush.
Just so that, you start thinking that, is it possible that this God who spoke and nothing became everything, could he really have written this entire plot and play in the heavens? And then what you find out is that with that, the first ones to get distorted are the ones that involve the end times with the devil. So now, if you were the devil in this world, and you were seeking to corrupt God's story. You just start there so they couldn't see what you were doing. Okay, and that's exactly what we find, is that as you get closer to the end, all right, those were the very first ones to get changed and distorted. All right, like the sign of cancer. Originally what it was a fence around a sheepfold. Now, isn't that interesting? Okay, but the word, as it translated through the centuries, it was a word for a tight grip. Okay, because God had hold, and those sheep were protected while they were inside of that fence. And so the word got translated for a grip, and they said, well, what has a really strong grip? A crab, and then you can kind of see how it gets corrupted. So that was originally a sheepfold. Okay, there's a greater and a lesser sheepfold. I mean, the story is absolutely amazing. The biblical parallels are fascinating. I'm going to read here from the summary on James Kennedy's. It's a really great book. I mean, this is probably written at probably like a 4th or 5th grade level. It's a very simple book to read. It gets you the gist of the story. And as you can see, I mean, Bollinger was, I think, Episcopalian minister. E. Raymond Capps is a absolutely fantastic biblical archaeologist. In fact, you can find, he has a video online on YouTube, E. Raymond Capp. You can look up The Glory of the Stars, and it's about an hour-long video, and he goes through and breaks this down. But again, it's in the 70s. He's a very old guy. It can be a little dry, and the audio is absolutely horrible because it was probably originally taped on VHS or something like that. He has passed away now. All right, the summary. The Serpent Destroyed, Chapter 14. In the beginning of our study of the zodiac, we noted that all of this was unfolding the truth that was hidden. Like a bud of a flower, the proto-evangelium of Genesis 3:15, and I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. We have seen this conflict presented to us over and over again throughout this study. For example, in the beginning of the story, Virgo, the virgin, is seen bringing forth a seed who is going to be engaged in the salvation and the justification of man, represented in Libra, the scales. Then immediately we see, now actually the Libra scales, that's kind of interesting, because on one side, the star names point to the idea of the price that cannot be paid, okay? And on the other side, the side that is down, is the price sufficient. All right, so it's interesting that, there was something that gave the idea that this could not be paid, all right, but someone paid it. Again, a connection to our gospel that we know of today. Then immediately we see the conflict beginning as the price to be paid is Scorpio, the first picture of the serpent, the devil, stings the mighty man Orpheus in the heel, but in turn is crushed beneath the right heel of the mighty man. Again we see the devil portrayed as a serpent, struggling and wiggling in the hands of Orpheus, and reaching up to try to take the crown away from God. All right, in the star story, that is actually called the crown of righteousness. Okay, just as we are told in the Old Testament that Satan would attempt to do. We then see Satan represented as Cetus, the sea monster, who is seeking after Pisces, the fishes, representative of the people of God. Again, there are two. Now, what's significant about the people of God in two?
Jewish and Christian?
That is actually, yes. There's another,
Greek
an older
and
one
Gentile.
also. What's the older connection with two? But yes, that is very true. And that is the story in the stars.
Gentile.
Jewish. There's actually, they're not all Jewish, right?
Oh, the house of Israel?
Thank you.
Judah and Israel.
Yeah. Now, even throughout this story, as God very, very well defines these two separately, even throughout this story, you have to be able to pick out. I was actually going to talk about it tonight. We'll do it next week. We'll talk about the differences of who is a Hebrew, who is a descendant of Abraham, who is considered Jew, who's not. Okay? But yes, in the star story, what we have is that there's two fish tied to this giant sea monster. One of them chooses to swim away, okay? The other one chooses to swim through this fountain of water being poured out, which would be representative of the Christian church. Okay, then Satan is presented as Cletus the sea monster, who is seeking after Pisces the fishes, representative of the people of God, and Cletus attempts to destroy them. Again, we see this, he is destroyed by Orion, which is the caricature in the sky of Christ, who holds his hand the dead carcass of the lion Anybody remember something important I told you guys about a lion
The
seeking?
The old,
The old lion.
the old lion roars.
The old lion roaring, seeking to devour those who he can catch. And you remember why they roar? The old lions roar?
Because their teeth are weak.
Okay, old lions, yes, the teeth are weak. And so they make up for being, strong and scary by, growling louder. But the bite has no grip to it. And then Satan is represented by the head of Gorgon, the Medusa. Having serpents for hair, she is slain by Perseus. Finally, it is represented by Hydra, the great serpent, which is covered so much of which covers so much of the sky. It's actually the largest constellation in the sky. Is this the great serpent, Hydra? But now, this final chapter, the serpent is triply destroyed by the feet of the lion, trampling on top of it, which you can see in that book in the pictures. The outpouring of the cup of wrath, and the devouring of the fowls of the air depicted in Corvus the raven. But in all of the 6 pictures of the serpent, we notice the conflict between Satan and Christ. In Scorpio the first, he is being crushed by Orpheus. In Sagittarius, he is aiming his arrow at the heart of... Actually, that is interesting. The archer in the sky is aiming an arrow right at the heart of the scorpion. And it's interesting. Anybody know what that scorpion's heart name is?
I don't remember.
It's the same word in our Hebrew text where we get the word war. Where David says that God makes his hand to war. That word war is the same name as the heart of the scorpion. The first one is being crushed by Orpheus, and Sagittarius is aiming his arrow at the heart of the serpent. Seeking after the crown, it is being held securely by Orpheus, the strong and mighty hero that is Christ. Cletus the sea monster is held under foot of Ares, the lamb, and is tied with the bands that are held by the lamb. The lion who was to go about seeking whom he may devour has then been killed by Orion. The Gorgon Medusa has been slain by Perseus, and Hydra is finally consumed once and all by the lion, tribe of Judah, which is, again, Christ. Okay, that last sign in the heavens. And in every case, we see that Christ is more than the conqueror. Interesting note here. Why should we preach on the zodiac? In conclusion, let me say the reasons for dealing with the zodiac at all are to show how the study overthrows the higher critical view on the origin of Christianity. Some critics have gathered all the ancient myths and said that Christianity was simply a repetition of those myths. So these myths of what they're saying, this story in the stars, resembles Christianity and the Hebrew faith so closely that they thought that it was a copy from that. They did not realize that those myths were simply the corruption of an earlier revelation given by God at the very beginning of mankind. I've actually kind of tied down that there's a very good chance that Noah may have been the first one to hear about this. Because of the idea that before that we had a firmament in the sky, there was some kind of a water barrier separation between us and the heavens of the heavens. The ancient Hebrews have the word for that. That word that we translate the firmament, their root word is based in salt. Okay, so the idea was there possibly a salt dome that surrounded the earth, with the exception at the very top, where there was an opening up to the heavens, where you could see the North Star, because in most of the ancient cultures, they always pointed north as the way to get out. Now, why would that have been if you could just go straight that way? They always pointed north for that opening. There was some kind of an opening at some point. To show that the true origin of pagan mythologies as a distortion of God's original revelation. That would be the mythologies that we've learned about, the Greek mythologies. In fact, if you know this story, and then you go back and review the stories that you know of from Zeus and all those characters, the Clash of the Titans, you start to put together all of this ancient history and go, those stories started somewhere. Those stories are so extravagant that they had to start somewhere. And we find out that they were a corruption of this. And if you guys dive in even farther, what you find out is that, remember when we talked about the expulsion from Egypt? Okay, that is very fresh in your memories, hopefully. There was 2 diasporas. The first diaspora happened when the southern kingdom rose up against the northern kingdom, all right? The rulers of Avaris, the northern part of Egypt, they fled by boat. All right, they went on to found Troy, which is very close to Greece. The stories were being translated from there to Italy, which is the next landing point of those who left from Egypt at the southern kingdoms, pushing forward to conquer the northern kingdom. They went to Greece, they went to Italy. Same way, if we have the star stories or the mythologies of Zeus and that, we start in Greece, and then we have the Romans having the same stories but slightly different names. All right, there's a reason for that. And it's because of that first diaspora, not the one with Moses, but of the rulers, the ruling class that were in the northern kingdom, that when basically they seen their walls were being sieged, they were going to be leaving town. Okay, they got out of there as quickly as possible. Again, another reason to show the divine origin of the scriptures, which proclaim the very same message written by the hand of God in the stars. To show that astrology is but a satanic distortion of the original revelation from God, that is a corruption, a deception on the part of the great deceiver, the great counterfeiter. Now, if you just think about it, the most beautiful luminaries in the sky at night, really, God put them there at the creation just so that the devil could move onto that territory and completely take it over? Or was it really that it did have speech that uttered from night to night, that went everywhere around the world where the world was inhabited, that we've forgotten over time, and Satan said, "Aha, I'm going to move in on this story and make it so corrupted that every Christian would not look at it." To the point where now, your generation, you guys are at a faith-believing rate of about 38% of you will be faithing believers. All right? Your grandparents, they only have a loss of about 28%. All right? You guys are at 48% right now. Now, just think about it. That all this idea that is there a God, there isn't a God, he doesn't do miracles, he doesn't show us himself. The greatest miracle is in the sky every night. But we have lost the torch that used to illuminate it. Okay? And that's why, for the last good 5 years, I have been telling people about this story. Because it shows from the very beginning of time when God stretched out the heavens, as Isaiah talks about, as science now confirms that the heavens are expanding. As God stretches the heavens, God set these things in a place that would read out a story to lost generations for centuries. All right, we have a chance to now resurrect this story again. And that's why I do as much as I do with this story. All right, and to preach the old story of the glad tidings with a new voice that resounds from the very vault of the heavens, so that in some way I may catch the attention with the hearts of some hearers whose ears may have become dull to chapter and verse. Now, isn't that true? And the other thing that I say often is that, what if one day we don't have this book anymore? What if this book becomes outlawed? And to have it like in China is a death sentence, okay? What if that's the case? How would you tell people about the gospel? But now, if you know the story in the stars, every night you can go out and you can tell them the glories of God. And depending on where you are, if you're around the 32nd, remember that longitude, parallel line? From there, you can see, over the course of a year, you can see the entire, every single constellation. Now, the other thing that's kind of interesting is that the letter of Romans, all right, I should have probably mentioned this earlier. The letter of Romans came directly after Paul disappears for 3 years into the desert, where he says that God himself, Christ, taught him. And then as soon as he comes out, in the very first chapter, he starts talking about this stuff. For the wrath of God is revealed from the heavens against all ungodliness, because that which is known is manifest in them. For the invisible things of him from creation of the world are clearly seen, and being understood by the workmanship of him. That's in the very first chapter. So God taught him something in those mountains in northern Arabia. Could it have been this story? And then he comes out with this, connecting to all these verses in the Old Testament. And lastly, of great importance, to magnify Jesus Christ, who comes from a virgin birth, whose glorious life and whose atoning death are all writ large with a diamond pen in the very by the very hand of God in the glittering panorama of the night sky. I would suggest looking into this. Okay, you guys can call me a nut if you want. You wouldn't be the first. And actually, nut would be very nice compared to some of the things I've been called. I don't have any other books to loan out. I only have the original copies here. But like I said, you can get Carl Zeiss. Was it Carl Zeiss?
Joseph.
Joseph Zeiss. Carl Zeiss was a guy who did instruments when I did surveying. Joseph Zeiss, you can get his online. It's a PDF. You can find it, download it, and look through it yourself. If you guys want to talk about it, I have now 10 years into this study. In fact, the last time I was up at camp, at the end of the night, I ended up sitting out by the campfire, and everybody knows their sign. Anybody here not know their zodiac sign? Honestly?
I did not know until I said it was a crowd.
Okay. Well, see, I mean, in our culture, have you guys ever not seen somebody, especially if you're in the working world, there's somebody at the office that's looking at their horoscopes every morning. Now, this is a time where you can go and talk to them and say, hey, do you know what the real meaning of that is? And I've used that many a times. When I was at camp, people were coming up to me and saying, hey, my sign is this. And I was able to share the gospel with them based off of whatever sign they were. I didn't care what they thought about it. I shared with them the most oldest truth of what it really meant. Okay? Anyone who came to me that night left different from when they came, and possibly even wondering, could there be more to this sign zodiac thing than just what this little column in the paper is? Okay? So, I mean, it's a very, very good teaching tool.
Hey, Robert.
Yes, sir.
It's also interesting to note that the Jewish calendar begins with the Virgin and ends with Leo.
Yes.
Which is God's calendar, not just the Hebrew calendar, but God's as well.
Right. Thank you, Nate. Tishri. All right, that's the first month of the Jewish New Year. Happens in September. If you guys check out the zodiac calendar, you'll find out that Virgo happens in September.
First day of the Jewish calendar is the 25th of September.
Well, it changes each year, though. But
No, it changes every 2 years.
But it always falls within Virgin.
yeah,
something
it
like
always
that.
falls within that sign of the Virgin.
It must be like right at the end of the Virgo.
Well, it varies because it can happen as early as late as early as September, but as late as October. I mean, it has a variance of where it begins.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, you can look up every Jewish New Year and see when the first of Tishri happens, and they have a backwards calendar that is like almost perfect,
Right.
where you can go back and check.
But yeah, it would. I'm not sure it would fall in that month, that period every time, but it does most of the time.
Yeah. But again, I mean, we're talking about, just that, that's where they
Sure.
start their calendar. Where
Sure.
do we start it in our pagan world? We started with Julius, okay? In July or January.
January.
Yeah, Janus. Not Julius, Janus, which was an ancient god. So any questions on that? Because I know that was pretty deep.
One other comment, not at all deep. It's interesting to think that, at least one reason that I would think awareness of this is down is just the ever-increasing migration of people into cities. And it's just harder to see the stars in that setting.
Because the light pollution. Yeah, actually, when I travel down to, what is that, Exchange? It is amazing that just from here to Exchange, right, the amount of stars that you can see just 15 minutes south of here. And you come up here and I look at Orion and I see the 3 in the belt and a couple 5 maybe that make him up. I travel 15 minutes south of here, there's 1,000 stars that are just where Orion is. And there was one time, actually, in all honesty, I don't know how they kept track of these stars in the ancient world, because when I was out in New Mexico, where they have that big radio array of radio telescopes, I forget what town it is. But it's in the middle of New Mexico, flatlands are nothing. And I stopped, pulled off to the side of the road, and when I looked up, it was absolutely the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. I have never ever imagined that when Abraham looked at the heavens and God says that your descendants will be more numerous than that, I couldn't even start to count. Absolutely, there's no way that I could even start to count that. So, but yeah, thanks for the tip about the calendar start. That is very good information.
It also plays a part too with keeping up with, I guess if you understood, I guess I don't want to say astrology, but the zodiac, I guess, if you keep up with that, and then you can see how like certain things line up in a certain time frame.
Oh yeah.
Like for
Because astrology and astronomy are two different things. One's the science of, and the other one is the one that everybody says we shouldn't be doing.
kind of like, I guess for example, like you look at like Revelation 12, for example. Like,
Yep.
like the woman clothed in stars. Like, you know what I'm talking about, Nate?
What?
The woman clothed in the stars with the moon at her feet.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like
And
the
you can follow the details of Revelations, and you can see that in the stars as well.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
very interesting that some of these things that are talked about in the story of the stars, these events are happening in the heavens. All right, and there are some people that are, basically saying that, hey, that might have been the marker. The Bible says that when this happens, and there it just happened, and when's the next time it's going to happen? Not forever.
well, no more. I'm thinking of that.
All right, so, yeah, I mean, there's so much stuff there. I mean, there's so much stuff that, we try to understand who God is and what God is, and we have absolutely no clue. If you really think about it, we talked about how the ancient Hebrew, every letter meant a number. And then when you add the letters for mom and dad, and then you add the numbers up for children, basically if you add mom plus dad, it equals children.